Fundamental movement patterns are the fast track to being able to move more athletically, which is something that I talked about last week. But there's one more tip that I wish that I knew when I first started on my conquest for strength and strength training. And that tip is the importance of training through different planes of motion. Movement doesn't just happen linearly, it can happen in different directions, and it can even be multi-directional at the same time, depending on what you're doing. Of the 600 muscles that we have in our bodies, some of those muscles have specific directions that they would prefer to move in, which makes those preferred directions that those muscles want to move in the best way to train those muscles and get the best training stimulus to them, leading not just to a good hypertrophy response and your ability to build muscles, but to also take those muscles and joints through different movement patterns, joint angles, and ranges of motion, which is going to give you more diversity in your training and exposing you to different ways of moving, resulting in better training, better gains, and a body that's more adapted to moving through all of its planes of motion and athletic movement ability. The three planes of motion where movement can happen on are going to be the sagittal plane, the frontal plane, and the transverse plane. Exercises are either going to happen along one of those planes individually, or it can be a combination of more than one of those planes. I'm going to start with the sagittal plane first, work my way down, and I'm going to talk about what that plane is, the common exercises associated and movements along that plane of motion, and then how to implement that or incorporate it into your training if this is a new concept to you. The sagittal plane. This is where most people spend their time training. And a simple definition of the sagittal plane is going to be a vertical plane which passes through the body longitudinally, dividing the body into left and right sections. Forwards and backwards movements are commonly associated with this plane of motion. Now, imagine that this Airex pad is a giant piece of glass that's splitting my body right down my center line. So I've got my left half and my right half, and any movement that occurs along this pane of glass is going to be considered sagittal plane exercise or movement. Some examples of sagittal plane exercises are going to be bench press, deadlift, boom, do rows, bicep curls, front delt raises, squats. See everything moving along this plane of imaginary glass that's running through my body. Those are all going to be sagittal plane exercises, so anything happening like that. If the bulk of your training consists of exercises like that, then you are spending most of your time training in the sagittal plane, which translates to That was a terrible drum roll. But what it translates to is your training program sucks. Seriously though. But means you're spending a lot of your time only working one direction in your training, leaving a lot of results training on the table and a lot of muscles that aren't getting worked the way that they need to be worked because you have your frontal plane and transverse plane and the muscles that help your body move along that plane as well. So if you're only training sagittal plane or most of your training is happening in the sagittal plane, you're leaving tons and tons and tons of gains on the table. Let's move on to the frontal plane. Now, taking the same pane of glass, but instead of splitting my body into left and right halves, we're gonna split my body through the opening in my ear all the way down into anterior and posterior halves, so front and back halves. So if this pane of glass is running through my body this way, that is going to be frontal plane movement. Adduction and abduction are going to be the commonly associated movements with this plane of motion. Some of the common frontal plane exercises are going to be considered something like lateral raises, lateral lunges, boom, lateral shuffles, or banded adduction and abduction. Be like abduction, adduction. So as you can see, all of those movements happening along this plane. Yeah. Frontal plane training builds your ability to move well laterally. Many sports and athletic movements require lateral movements, such as changes of direction, side steps, or shuffles. If you don't train your muscles to move well through these planes of motions, you can't expect improvements in your ability to move well, your agility, and just how well you can perform different planes of motion movement if you don't train the planes of motion that you need to move in. Yes. Yes. Finally, the last plane of motion, the transverse plane. We're going to take our Eric's pad, our imaginary pane of glass, and now it's going to split my body into upper and lower halves. So any movements occurring along this plane of motion are going to be transverse plane. Commonly associated exercises with this are going to be rotational type exercises. This can be exercises like wood chops, all types of those, Russian twists, everybody's favorite and most useless rotator cuff warm-up exercise with the dumbbell doing internal and external rotation. Those are all going to be transverse plane exercises. Rotational movement patterns in sports goes without saying. Anything throwing related or swinging related is going to require rotational movement pattern. Pivoting and changes of direction are also going to require some rotation along the transverse plane. So are some things like some types of kicks and some takedowns as well. So a lot of application for transverse plane movement in sport. One thing that makes transverse plane training unique is that when you train through this plane of motion, each side of your body is doing different things. So like if you're swinging a baseball bat, when you swing, that hip is rotating, so it's pushing, and then the other half of my body is pulling in order to get my body to twist and move. Same thing with like a golf club. If you're doing a kick, same thing as well. There's that one side of your body is going to be pulling, one side of your body is going to be pushing. So you're training your muscles differently on each side, which is going to help you build better coordination, neuromuscular control, and being able to efficiently build that pattern of how those different muscles engage throughout transverse plane exercises. Sagittal, frontal, and transverse, your three planes of motion in which movement occurs. If you're unfamiliar with training through different planes of motion, my suggestion would be to incorporate all three into your training days. So every day that you train, incorporate one of each plane, one exercise of each plane of motion into your training. So that way you can take advantage of the unique benefits that each plane of motion offers, and to learn and see how to train your body through these different movements. So that way you can get better moving through different types of movement that our bodies are capable of doing. Once you're confident moving through the three planes of motion individually, you could start combining different planes of motion to create your own exercises and movement patterns. You can combine exercises like frontal plane and transverse plane exercises, or you can combine movements like sagittal plane and frontal plane movements together. These multi-directional and multi-planar exercises are going to help your body adapt to the demands of more athletic movement, higher paced movements, to be able to build that coordination, rhythm, and timing with how your body moves, to be able to work through multiple directions or multiple planes of motion at once, improving your athleticism and ability to just move in general. So that's going to wrap it up for this video with planes of motion. But before I end this, if you are looking to improve your training, here's exactly how I would suggest starting that. Make sure you've got your foundational movement patterns, get your workouts based around foundational movement patterns, and then incorporate one plane of motion into every workout day that you do. So every training day, have a sagittal plane exercise, a frontal plane exercise, and a transverse plane exercise. One of the things that I plan on doing in future videos is to build off of foundational movement patterns in this training in planes video. So I'm going to create some workouts based around these different planes and show you what that would look like in application. So be on the lookout for those. Like, comment, subscribe, drop any questions you got down below. And that's going to be it for this video. Stay tuned for the next one, and I'll see y'all soon.